The scalding tar hissed as it struck Sarah's skin, a plume of acrid smoke rising with her agonized scream. Feathers, cruelly white against the black, viscous horror, clung to her trembling frame. The mob in Redemption Gulch roared its approval, a symphony of self-righteous hatred. They believed this was justice. From the deep shadow of the cottonwoods, unseen, a pair of eyes, dark and cold as a desert night, witnessed it all. Coda, the Comanche warrior, his face, a mask of stone, betrayed nothing of the inferno igniting within his soul. They thought they had silenced a supposed evil. They had no idea they had just awakened something far more relentless, something that would ensure they paid for every jeer, every drop of her terror. Their escape was an illusion, for Coda saw, and Coda would not forget. Redemption Gulch. The name itself was a contradiction, a layer of paint over rotting wood. From afar, it aspired to innocence, the church steeple reaching for an uncaring sky, a scattering of buildings like weathered dice thrown against the plains. But draw closer, and the illusion frayed. The laughter from the saloon often cracked with desperation, and the pronouncements from Mayor Thompson's lips dripped with a piety that barely concealed his avarice. He was a man who measured worth in coin and control, his authority bolstered by his brutish enforcer, Bart, a man whose knuckles were often as bloody as his intentions. The town itself seemed to breathe shallowly, its air thick with unspoken anxieties and a readiness to judge. Into this uneasy sanctuary, Sarah had arrived months before. She was a quiet woman, her past a closed book, her worldly goods contained in a single, worn trunk. She'd sought only a small measure of peace, taking up residence in a derelict cabin at the town's edge. Its garden was choked with weeds, but the structure was sound, much like Sarah herself. With skilled hands, she coaxed life back into the soil, and with a knowledge of herbs passed down through generations, she offered remedies. Mending clothes, brewing teas for fevers, small acts of service. Yet her very quietness, her refusal to be drawn into the town's petty dramas, made her an object of suspicion. In Redemption Gulch, difference was often mistaken for danger. Coda knew these lands as he knew the lines on his own palm. His people had hunted and lived here long before the first nail was hammered into Redemption Gulch's foundations. Now he moved as a solitary whisper between the old world and the new, trading furs or finely crafted arrowheads with the outlying settlements. He'd been to Redemption Gulch. He'd felt the chill in Mayor Thompson's handshake, seen the predatory glint in Bart's eyes. He'd also observed Sarah, her movements economical as she tended her small plot, an island of quiet diligence in a restless sea. He recognized the weariness of someone trying to live unnoticed, a feeling that resonated deep within his own spirit. He, too, sought a life free from strife, but the West rarely granted such wishes. His own history was etched with conflict, his senses honed by survival, his warrior instincts lying like embers beneath a thin layer of ash dormant, but ready to flare. He noted the way the wind carried whispers in this town, and a cold premonition settled in his gut. The first stone cast at Sarah was small, almost insignificant, yet it landed with calculated force. A bout of summer sickness had troubled a few of Redemption Gulch's children. One of them, Mayor Thompson's own kin, recovered more slowly than the mayor's impatient nature deemed acceptable, despite Sarah offering a willow bark infusion. Bart, ever eager to sow discord, seized the moment. His voice, rough and carrying, began to plant the seeds of doubt. She was a strange woman, he'd mutter, her remedies unnatural. Who could say what she truly practiced in that isolated cabin? Then a shipment of flour to Thompson's general store arrived infested, a costly loss. Thompson, his face a mask of theatrical outrage, stood on the porch of his establishment, his voice booming across the dusty square. He declared that the town was under attack by dark influences, that their very prosperity was threatened. His gaze, sharp and accusing, found Sarah as she passed by, a basket of mended shirts on her arm. She met his stare for a moment, her own expression unreadable, before continuing on, her shoulders perhaps a fraction straighter. From the cool shade of the livery, where he'd been calmly observing the town's rhythms while ostensibly checking a saddle strap. Coda saw the tableau unfold. He saw the subtle shift in the townsfolk's demeanor, the way their eyes followed Sarah, now tinged with a suspicion that hadn't been there moments before. He saw Bart's smirk of satisfaction as he stood shoulder to shoulder with Thompson, a silent, hulking affirmation of the mayor's insinuations. The air in Redemption Gulch, already thin with unspoken tensions, grew palpably colder. A familiar knot tightened in Coda's stomach. He'd seen this poison spread before, the powerful anointing a scapegoat, the fearful eagerly lapping it up. The quiet warrior within him registered the change in the wind. This was no longer mere unease. This was the deliberate, cruel shaping of a victim. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. The hunt had begun, though the hunters did not yet know they too were prey. The venomous whispers about Sarah coiled through Redemption Gulch, tightening their grip. One morning, she awoke to find her small herb garden savaged, plants uprooted and crushed into the earth. A crude, misshapen symbol, meant to signify witchcraft, was daubed in filth on her cabin door. When she ventured to the general store for basic supplies, conversations would cease abruptly, replaced by a hostile silence. Mayor Thompson, presiding behind his counter, served her with a disdainful slowness. His lips curled. He told her, his voice carrying for all to hear, that some people were just magnets for ill fortune. Bart, perpetually lurking nearby, punctuated the mayor's pronouncement with a harsh, barking laugh. Sarah's hands, usually so steady, trembled as she paid. She stated clearly that she meant no one any harm, that her only wish was to live peacefully. Thompson retorted that peace was a privilege, not a right, and that certain disturbances required cleansing. She left the store, the weight of their collective animosity a physical burden. Her attempts to reason with those she had once considered neutral, even friendly, were met with averted gazes and mumbled excuses. Fear, expertly wielded by Thompson and Bart, was proving to be a powerful contagion. She was being isolated, her world shrinking to the confines of her small, besieged cabin. Coda witnessed it all. His visits to the town were infrequent, always purposeful, but his eyes missed nothing. He saw the deliberate acts of petty cruelty, the way the fabric of the community was being rewoven to exclude and condemn Sarah. He saw the deepening shadows of exhaustion and fear under her eyes, though her quiet defiance still flickered. He was not one to interfere in the squabbles of the Vihoe, unless a fundamental boundary of human decency was crossed. But his observation was far from passive. His gaze sharpened as he saw Bart subtly trip a child, who then ran from Sarah's path. The blame deflected onto her. He listened unseen, as Thompson addressed a small, easily swayed group, his words dripping with false concern that barely masked the underlying malice. His mind, trained in the arts of survival and strategy, began to catalog the town's vulnerabilities, its routines, the key figures in its hierarchy of cruelty. He checked the balance of his knife, the tension of his bowstring, not out of immediate intent, but from a lifetime of ingrained readiness. The part of him that yearned for the quiet solitude of the wilderness felt a profound weariness descend. Yet another part, the warrior forged in the crucible of his people's struggle, felt a cold, hard clarity. A line was being approached, a line of unforgivable transgression. And if that line was crossed, his path would be set. The quiet observer was also a judge, and the evidence was rapidly accumulating. The coiled readiness beneath his calm was tightening. The simmering hatred in Redemption Gulch finally boiled over on a day choked with heat and dust. A prized stallion belonging to one of Thompson's cronies was found inexplicably lame. Before any rational assessment could be made, Bart's voice, raw with accusation, ripped through the air. It was Sarah. He bellowed. Her dark arts were to blame. The cry was all the justification the primed mob needed. Mayor Thompson, materializing as if on cue, clambered onto a makeshift platform. He addressed the good people of Redemption Gulch, his voice quivering with feigned sorrow and righteous fury. He lamented that they had tolerated this darkness for too long, their patience met only with malevolence. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger towards Sarah's cabin, declaring her a blight, a consort of shadows, a bringer of misfortune. For the safety of their families, he thundered, for the sanctity of their homes, she must be made an example of, she must be purified. A guttural roar erupted from the crowd, a chilling chorus of mob rule. Led by Bart, his face a mask of savage anticipation, they surged towards Sarah's small dwelling. She heard their approach, the thunder of their boots, the ugliness of their shouts. She tried to secure her door, but the flimsy wood splintered under their combined assault. Rough hands seized her, dragging her from the sanctuary of her home out into the merciless glare of the sun. Her pleas for mercy were drowned out by their jeers and taunts. They hauled her to the center of town, to the dusty ground before the vainglorious church. A barrel of thick, bubbling tar was produced, its foul stench filling the air. A sack of feathers, ripped from a nearby coop, lay ready. Sarah, her dress torn, her face a mask of stark terror, looked upon the faces surrounding her, faces that had once offered polite nods, faces she had offered help. Now they were contorted with a shared, gleeful hatred. From the deep, cool sanctuary of the cottonwood grove, Coda watched. His jaw was granite, the muscles in his neck standing out like taut cords. He had witnessed the brutality of battle, the indifferent cruelty of nature. But this premeditated, gleeful torment of a defenseless woman by a crowd reveling in their perceived righteousness, it stirred an ancient, cold fury within him. His hand, as if of its own accord, closed around the hilt of the knife at his belt, his knuckles showing white. He had observed. He had assessed. The line had been crossed, obliterated. The time for quiet contemplation was over. As the first viscous glob of scalding tar struck Sarah's exposed skin, and her scream of pure agony tore through the superheated air, a silent, unbreakable vow formed in Coda's warrior heart. Redemption Gulch had just invited a reckoning it could not possibly comprehend. His eyes, like chips of obsidian reflecting a frozen fire, held no pity, only the unwavering promise of a terrible, cleansing storm. They thought they were dispensing justice. Coda knew, with chilling certainty, they were merely signing their own condemnation. The townsfolk of Redemption Gulch celebrated their vile handiwork. They mocked and jeered as Sarah, a grotesque caricature in tar and feathers, stumbled and fell, her spirit battered, her body a testament to their collective barbarity. Mayor Thompson observed, a grim satisfaction etched on his face, as if he were presiding over a sacred, cleansing ritual. Bart, his chest puffed with pride, swaggered through the crowd, accepting their backslapping approval. They felt powerful, united in their depravity, convinced they had purged the darkness from their midst. They laughed, they pointed, then they began to disperse, eager to return to their supposedly purified lives, the image of Sarah's torment already receding into a self-congratulatory tale. They believed it was finished. They believed they had triumphed. But as the last of the revelers faded away, and Sarah lay whimpering and broken in the filth-strewn dust, a new, silent chapter was commencing. Coda did not erupt in a berserker rage. Such was not his way. The inferno that blazed within him was a cold, controlled burn, sharpening his senses, honing his focus. His retribution would be a masterpiece of precision and of escalating terror. His first act was to retrieve Sarah. Moving like a ghost in the deepening twilight, he circled the town, his senses absorbing every detail, every shadow, every escape route, every point of vulnerability. He found Sarah barely conscious, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. He lifted her with a gentleness that belied the strength in his arms, a strength usually reserved for drawing a bow or wielding a blade. He carried her deep into the protective embrace of the woods, to a hidden alcove he knew, a place of silence and healing. There, with the ancient knowledge of his people, he tended to her burns, his movements swift and economical, his expression unreadable save for the implacable set of his jaw. He left her with fresh water and a silent promise in his eyes that spoke louder than any words. Then his focus returned, cold and absolute, to Redemption Gulch. The true twist in Coda's vengeance was not in its immediacy, but in its insidious, creeping nature. The terror began subtly. That very night, Bart, lurching home from the saloon, his belly full of cheap whiskey and his mind full of his own importance, discovered a single, stark black-feathered arrow quivering in the wood of his shack door. It wasn't shot with force. It was placed with an unnerving, deliberate precision, the razor-sharp tip barely piercing the surface. A silent, deadly calling card. No sound had accompanied its arrival. No note explained its presence. There was only the arrow and the sudden, ice-cold realization that he had been watched, marked by an unseen, skilled adversary. Bart's liquor-fueled bravado vanished like smoke in a hard wind. The following morning, Mayor Thompson awoke to a profound and unsettling silence. The great bell in his ostentatiously proud church steeple, the bell that summoned his flock and announced his decrees, was mute. Not broken, but meticulously, expertly muffled, its clapper bound tightly with intricately knotted strips of rawhide that Coda had prepared. When Thompson, flustered and annoyed, attempted to ring it for his Sunday sermon, only a dull, choked thud answered his efforts. A ripple of unease spread through the townsfolk gathered below. It was unnatural, an ill omen. Later that day, the main water trough outside the general store was found to be tainted, not with poison, but with a bitter, unpalatable herb that rendered the water undrinkable. These were small incursions, yet each one was a calculated jab, designed to unnerve, to remind them of a hidden presence, a watchful eye. Coda moved with the timeless patience of a predator stalking its quarry. He remained unseen, unheard. He became the whisper in the rustling leaves, the fleeting shadow at the periphery of vision, the inexplicable chill that raised gooseflesh on a warm afternoon. He utilized his profound knowledge of the terrain, his innate mastery of stealth. One by one, those individuals who had been most vocal, most enthusiastic in their torment of Sarah, found themselves the recipients of his unsettling attentions. A prized hunting rifle vanished from a supposedly secure, locked cabinet, only to reappear days later, leaning conspicuously against the church door, its firing pin expertly removed. A town bully, known for kicking Sarah when she was down, discovered his horse's saddle girth slashed, the leather severed with clean, precise cuts that spoke of a steady, vengeful hand. A new kind of fear began to take root in Redemption Gulch, a fear far more potent and insidious than the manufactured paranoia they had directed at Sarah. This fear was tangible, its source unknown but undeniably intelligent, undeniably capable, and seemingly everywhere at once. The townsfolk began to jump at shadows. Windows were shuttered earlier, doors bolted more securely. The boisterous noise of the saloon dwindled to hushed, anxious murmurs. The whispers were no longer about Sarah's supposed witchcraft, but about a vengeful spirit, an unseen retribution that was methodically turning their town into a prison of escalating dread. Mayor Thompson attempted to project an image of calm authority, but his bluster rang hollow, his own eyes betraying a growing anxiety. He increased his personal precautions, but the chilling knowledge that this unseen adversary could silence the church bell, could enter locked homes at will, gnawed at his composure. The town that had so eagerly united to condemn an innocent woman was now fracturing under the weight of its own guilt and a terrifying, unseen judgment. They had sown the wind, and Coda was ensuring they reaped a whirlwind of psychological torment. He was not just unleashing hell. He was meticulously, artfully constructing it, brick by terrifying brick, around their crumbling world. The relentless, calculated pressure Coda applied began to erode the very foundations of Redemption Gulch's composure. Nights became odysseys of imagined sounds and sudden, inexplicable disturbances. Tools would vanish from the blacksmith's forge, only to be discovered arranged in a disturbing, symbolic pattern on the steps of the now silent church. The rope for the town well was found one morning expertly frayed, weakened to the point of imminent collapse. These were not acts of random mischief. They were precise, deeply unsettling, and carried an air of chilling intimacy, as if the avenger knew their routines, their fears, their deepest secrets. Coda was demonstrating, without ever showing his face, that he could reach anywhere, touch anything, or anyone at will. Bart, once the cocksure enforcer, degenerated into a twitching, hollow-eyed parody of his former self. He rarely ventured out unaccompanied, and when necessity forced him to, his hand never strayed far from the pistol he now wore constantly, his eyes darting nervously at every unexplained sound. But Coda had no interest in a simple, crude gunfight. His aim was to dismantle Bart's arrogance from within, to watch the bully's cruelty curdle into abject terror. One evening, as Bart nervously barricaded himself inside his squalid shack, he heard a faint sound just outside his window, the distinct, unmistakable whisper of an arrow being drawn slowly, deliberately, across a bowstring. He froze, cold sweat beading on his brow, his heart hammering against his ribs. He waited, braced for the impact, but no arrow flew. The sound eventually faded into the oppressive silence of the night, leaving only Bart's ragged, panicked breathing and the crushing weight of his own fear. Coda was toying with him, a patient hunter enjoying the terror of his cornered prey. Mayor Thompson attempted to rally his dwindling support. He spoke of courage, of community, of standing united against this cowardly, unknown assailant. But his words lacked conviction. His own face was pale. His gaze darted with an unease he couldn't conceal. The townsfolk, once so quick to follow his lead when the target was a defenseless woman, now hesitated. They saw the fear in their leader's eyes, and it only magnified their own. New whispers began to circulate, far different from the old ones. Perhaps Sarah had been innocent. Perhaps this relentless, unseen torment was a righteous vengeance, a curse they had brought upon themselves through their own malice. The cohesive brutality of the mob was shattering, replaced by individual dread and the dawning, uncomfortable sting of guilt. Coda selected his moment for direct confrontation with meticulous care. He understood that to break the town's will, he first had to shatter its leaders. He lured Bart out one moonless night, using a series of small, strategically placed sounds, a snapped twig here, a dislodged pebble there, drawing him away from the relative safety of the town center, towards the shadowy periphery of the woods, near the still silent, symbolically muffled church. Bart, desperate to reclaim some shred of his lost bravado, and perhaps foolhardy enough to believe he could confront this phantom, followed, his pistol drawn, muttering empty threats into the oppressive darkness. Suddenly, Coda materialized, not with a ferocious war cry, but like a phantom coalescing from the deepest shadows, his movements utterly fluid, preternaturally silent. Before Bart could even register his presence, let alone raise his weapon, Coda disarmed him with a single, swift, incapacitating strike to the wrist. Bart's pistol clattered uselessly to the ground. The hulking brute, so accustomed to instilling fear through violence, found himself utterly powerless, staring into eyes that held the unyielding cold of a winter blizzard. Coda's voice, when he spoke, was low, almost a whisper, yet it sliced through the night air with the chilling sharpness of a newly honed blade. Did Bart enjoy inflicting pain? He asked. Did he relish the fear he saw in the eyes of the weak? Coda did not raise his voice. He had no need. His very presence, his aura of controlled, lethal intensity, was overwhelming. He did not physically torture Bart, not in the crude, public way Bart and the town had tortured Sarah. Instead, he wielded words as weapons, his voice dispassionate yet utterly damning, as he painted vivid, unflinching pictures of Bart's own cruelty. He recounted every jeer, every vicious kick, every act of malice Bart had perpetrated against Sarah, holding up an undeniable mirror to the man's profound ugliness. Bart began to tremble uncontrollably, not from the night chill, but from a deep, soul-shaking terror. Next, Coda turned his attention to Mayor Thompson. He did not seek a confrontation in Thompson's home, nor did he plan a public spectacle. Instead, he left a message, stark and irrefutable, upon the altar of Thompson's own desecrated church. It was Sarah's tattered, tar-stained dress, carefully, almost reverently laid out. Beside it, placed with ceremonial precision, was a single, perfect eagle feather, a potent symbol to Coda's people, representing truth, spirit, and sacred judgment. And beneath it a small, intricately carved wooden effigy of a portly man with a clearly forked tongue, pierced through its symbolic heart with a tiny, sharp sliver of obsidian. When Thompson discovered this chilling tableau the next morning, his face drained of all color, becoming a mask of gray terror. This was no mere threat. It was a profound, spiritual condemnation. It was an unmistakable message that his hypocrisy, his false piety, his entire corrupt existence, had been witnessed, judged, and found wanting by a power far beyond his comprehension or control. The townsfolk who glimpsed the display whispered in hushed, terrified tones. The arrow, once a mere projectile, now represented the piercing, inescapable truth that Coda had delivered. The true climax arrived not in a volley of gunfire or a chaotic brawl, but in the slow, agonizing, public unraveling of the town's corrupt leadership. Thompson, utterly broken and consumed by fear, attempted to flee Redemption Gulch under the concealing shroud of darkness. Coda was waiting, not to inflict physical harm, but to ensure Thompson's humiliation was absolute and witnessed. As Thompson frantically tried to saddle his horse in the dim light of the stables, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Sarah. Coda had brought her back, her burns beginning to heal, her spirit bruised and battered but undeniably, resiliently intact. She stood there, silent, her gaze fixed on the cowering mare. Her eyes, no longer holding fear, but filled with a quiet, sorrowful, and profound accusation, were more damning than any weapon Coda could have wielded. Then Coda himself stepped into the faint light. He uttered no word. He simply looked from Thompson to the small, silent group of townsfolk who had been drawn by the hushed commotion, their faces pale and apprehensive in the pre-dawn gloom. The silence in the stable was thick, broken only by Thompson's pathetic, whimpering attempts at justification. In that moment, the town saw their leader stripped bare of his authority, his dignity, his manufactured righteousness, exposed as a craven coward. They saw Sarah, the innocent victim of their collective cruelty, standing with a quiet strength and dignity they had never possessed. The payoff was not merely Coda's victory. It was the utter, public decimation of Redemption Gulch's moral authority. Justice, in the raw, untamed heart of the West, had been unequivocally served, not by a distant court or a flawed legal system, but by the unwavering resolve of a lone Comanche warrior and the undeniable, silent truth of a woman grievously wronged. The hell Coda had unleashed was, in the end, the inescapable reflection of their own malevolence, brought home to roost with chilling precision. The dawn that eventually broke over Redemption Gulch was weak and uncertain, much like the town's future. Mayor Thompson, divested of his power and his pretense, was gone before the sun had fully risen, riding out not as a figure of authority, but as a disgraced pariah, the chilling fear of Coda's potential return a permanent brand on his soul. Bart, a hollowed-out shell of a man, was seen muttering to himself, his former aggression replaced by a haunted, vacant stare that would likely shadow him for the rest of his days. He, too, eventually drifted away from Redemption Gulch, unable to bear the oppressive weight of his actions and the ever-present terror of what Coda represented. Redemption Gulch did not easily recover. The church bell remained eerily muffled for a long, somber time, a constant, silent reminder of their collective shame and the profound, unspoken judgment that had descended upon them. The townsfolk who chose to remain were noticeably quieter, more watchful, their gazes less certain, their swagger diminished. The casual cruelty that had once festered just beneath the surface was now tempered by a wary respect for the unseen, and by a nagging, uncomfortable guilt that Coda had so expertly and systematically unearthed. Some now looked at Sarah with a new, hesitant kindness, though many still instinctively avoided her, their own fear and shame an invisible barrier between them. Coda, his purpose fulfilled, vanished as silently and mysteriously as he had conducted his campaign of retribution. He had no desire to rule the town, nor any interest in further bloodshed. His singular aim had been to correct a grievous injustice, to deliver a pure and unadulterated form of justice that the so-called civilized world had proven incapable of providing. He melted back into the vast, indifferent expanse of the plains, becoming once more a guardian spirit, a whisper on the wind, leaving behind not just fear, but a potent, enduring legend. It became a tale told in hushed, reverent tones around flickering campfires for many years to come. The story of the Comanche who witnessed an abomination and brought an entire town to its knees, not merely with arrows and knives, but with a terrifying, intimate understanding of the human heart and its capacity for both monumental cruelty and profound, paralyzing fear. Sarah, with a resilience that surprised even herself, chose to stay, at least for a time. The small, once besieged cabin at the edge of town, previously a symbol of her isolation, slowly transformed into a place of quiet, unassuming strength. She tended her garden, which, under her patient care, began to flourish once more. She continued to mend clothes, to offer her herbal remedies, but now there was a new, visible steel in her spine, a quiet fortitude forged in the crucible of tar and feathers. The townsfolk, when they had dealings with her, did so with a newfound caution that bordered on respect, sometimes even awe. They knew, or at least deeply suspected, who her silent, formidable protector had been. The tale of Coda and the reckoning of Redemption Gulch became a stark, indelible lesson etched into the collective memory of the frontier. It served as a potent reminder that justice in the untamed West often wore unexpected, formidable faces, and that true strength resided not in the boisterous fury of a mob, but in the quiet, unyielding resolve of those who dared to stand for what was fundamentally right, even if, for a time, they had to stand utterly alone. The dust eventually settled in Redemption Gulch, but the air itself seemed forever changed, forever carrying the faint, chilling echo of a warrior's vow. The hard-won peace that followed was one built upon the smoking ashes of a terrible, unforgettable lesson. The rugged, untamable spirit of the frontier had spoken, and its voice was as unforgiving as it was undeniably just.